Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Michelle Vu. We're going to talk about conscious leadership. We're going to talk about creating a space for collaborative culture in sales teams. We're going to talk about your 6 pillars of culture. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Colin. Excited to be here.
I'm excited as well. Culture is not something that I think of first when I think of building a sales team, and I think it's arguably one of the most important pieces. I think a helpful piece of context that I didn't include in the intro is you're the VP of Sales and Customer Success for commercial and mid-market at G2. So we're not talking about culture on a small team. We're talking about culture on a big team at a fairly large company. I think there's kind of 2 different ways to think about this if you are either at a big or small company. One, you can see sort of what a really large company does to be successful at scale, which is, I think as many of you have probably noticed engaging with some large companies, it's very hard to create a consistent feel, a consistent playbook, consistent anything at a very large company. And so one, if you're trying to think, okay, well, how do I replicate this? This would be a great episode for you. If you are working for a smaller company or you're trying to go 0 to 1 on culture, I think this is also going to be great because it'll tell you as you're going 0 to 1, what are some things to watch out for? What are some pitfalls? What are some traps? And we get to learn from somebody who's done this, not just, on a small team, but at scale. And so, Michelle, I'm so excited to have you on. I'd love to start with your kind of superhero origin story. Talk to me about how you got here, because I don't think you were born as a VP of sales and suddenly, you've been alive for a couple of months now. I suspect there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this. So tell me about how you got here and how culture became such a big part of what gets you excited.
Yeah. I'll say it's funny. I have had a quota in different ways since I was 15. Mm-hmm. Worked for my dad and get his friends with, or my dad's friend's entrepreneur, and built this company. And I came in as my first job, and it's like, okay, how many surveys can you get? And it was just one of those things that kept building. And then in college, I worked at a car dealership. And then out of college, I did door-to-door office supply sales. So that was like I wish everybody could have that experience, because no matter what, having somebody to tell you no right in front of your face is a humbling and amazing learning experience. So I did that for many years. And I actually had my first leader role transitioning into inside sales through the same company when I was 24 and had 21 direct reports. And I had to figure out right away first what I was doing, because coming in with first time leader role and having 21 people that I needed to make sure I was taking care of and helping, it was a lot. And so what I realized is the human connection, and to be able to figure out what are we all doing this for? Everyone's stressed. We have quotas. We have things that are happening, but what are we doing this for? And that's really how I established my first understanding of the importance of having a positive culture in sales. I mean, what I did the very first time is I took a piece of paper and everyone had their own paper and put their name on it. And in our team meeting, you just wrote one word that you described them, that positive word that described them. And at the end, everyone had their sheet. We had 21 different words, and they put it in their cubicle, because we had cubicle. That I had a Y cord, to sit next to them when they were on their calls. That was the first break into it for me.
Like an actual Y,
like a Y code. I don't know if people know.
Totally.
Listeners might
explain to the people that are a little bit younger.
Yeah. It was, you had wired headphones and there was a cord so I could listen. But anywho, from there, I went back into being an individual contributor, and then built myself back into being a leader. And I have been a sales leader for almost 12 years.
So love it. I apologize. My phone is going off. I forgot to put it on Do Not Disturb mode.
All good. Probably a sales call. You know.
Probably. You know what? Honestly, it's probably my wife because she's the only person who can actually ring my phone because I do get so many calls with no numbers or no names associated with them.
Yeah, I get it.
So, sales leader for the last 12 years in sales, like I don't think I could even spell like direct reports when I was 24, let alone lead that many people. I'm curious. I bet you have seen some examples of really amazing culture and some like kind of peak performance and some examples of a valley. And so I'd love to talk about just to help paint the picture for the audience, because I find if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to know what either look like. And I bet most people are probably somewhere in the middle. It's a spectrum. It's not necessarily binary. And so I'd love for you to help me understand a time when you maybe went from, peak performance to a valley or vice versa, and help me understand what that looked like and what do you think kind of contributed to those.
Yeah, I think no matter what, and what I always think about from early on in my career, having to figure it out, just not knowing. I have my art degree. I didn't know I was going to be going into sales full time. And I am somebody that, right? It's true. Actually, they have degrees now, which is cool. I'm very jealous of them that can actually do that. But I think back to some of the times. I know I mentioned the door-to-door sales. That was really hard. I sold paper to a butcher, and I was really like proud of that, like copier paper. And I came back because you came in the morning, then you had to go out field, and then you came back with your sales. That was like a peak. Like I did this, or I sold like no soliciting signs to people that told me not to solicit them. But if I go back, when I got into more of the tech space, thinking about renewals and having, some really extremely amazing months where exceeded the quota. And I can remember one renewal very specifically. Of course, I'm not going to name names, but walked away and they couldn't move forward. The budget was not going to be allocated to the product. Basically, the owner of the company said we did everything right. They wanted everything about what we had sold and pitched and all of that, but it just wasn't going to happen. And so it was one of those things that's like, okay, I'm always trying to learn from these moments, and I can never do it. You're never going to do everything perfectly right. But I took that one very personal. And it really took me a moment. And, I had my leader at the time who was incredible, was like, step away. I could step away, take the rest of the day. And that was when we were physically in the office. And I was like, that doesn't happen. And this was probably 10, 11 years ago. And I think about that. It's like, that is what I want to be for my people, because that was a moment that I was just feeling real down in the dumps. And since then, and when I continued in my career as being an IC before I moved back into leadership, I think about that moment and how do I create all the positive memories or moments when I am feeling that, so I can work myself back up? Because the whole thing of being a motivator it's all personal. I can't come in as a leader and say, I'm going to make you be motivated. They have to have the internal drive to do that. And so like, how do you build that for them? And one of the little things that I started doing is building a warm fuzzy folder. I mean, I don't know if people make folders as often on their laptops, but basically I put everything I got a shout out, a praise, a positive from a customer, from anyone, and I put it in there. And when I just got a bad no or something just didn't go my way, I'd go back in there to build myself back up. And like, I can do this. Like, it's one of those things where having 12 months of consistent performance is incredible, but it's not always going to happen.
Mm-hmm. I love how you have the little folder that's like, this folder reminds me why I'm awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. It's like hard to say that out loud too. It's like, wow, it's like a me folder all about me. But it's like, when you're in this job, you really have to figure out how you can get yourself out of that. Because when you, one of my leaders was like, always ask the interview question, do you hate to lose or love to win? And it was one of those trick questions of like, okay, how are they going to react? If they hate to lose, maybe they aren't the best when they're in their valley. If they love to win, maybe they're staying positive of where they're going to be. So I don't know. It's like, it's one of those mind things of how do I ensure they're focused and they have an outlet to feel the feels, like walk away. I love that. I take that with me daily in any conversation, because I want people to, it's like, this is you don't have like a work-life balance as much as you would like in sales, because, a contract comes in and if you're on vacation, what are you going to do? Of course, like I don't want people working on vacation, but step away when you need to, type of thing.
It's kind of like I get the little dopamine hit of like, did that deal come in? Did that deal come in? It's like you check your email, but it's really not your standard email. It's like the lottery, I'm having that dopamine like hit of like, yes.
Yeah.
You said something earlier about like building the environment for people to be successful in. I'm curious, it sounds like you're very intentional about building a place for culture to take place. Can you talk to me about, why that's important, and maybe just the difference between like creating culture and like creating an environment that will foster a culture? Maybe help me understand that difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. When you think about the role of a sales leader, when I look at it is, and I even say this to any rep I'm talking to that maybe wants to be a leader, maybe doesn't. It's like, as an IC, it's about you control your wallet, you control your schedule, you control basically everything. If you're at a moment in time where you're ready for that to be your team to do that, and like your team are actually now your customers, that's when it's maybe time for you to move into a role like that. And so it's not an overnight thing in what I'm trying to say. Like once you make that decision, you are starting to build. And everything that you're doing, you want to make sure that you're removing roadblocks for your team. You're making sure they feel like they can be themselves and have, a safe environment, making sure that they can speak their voice, making sure that they really, really know that we all have everyone's back, and you really kind of win together and lose together in a sense, even though we all have individual quotas. So that's where, when I was thinking about what culture meant to me, people were asking, I had my brand was developing a little bit more of like, okay, on Michelle's team, she's doing all these things and it sounds really fun. It sounds like, everyone is really in it and working together. And that's where I was like, I need to think through what culture really does mean to me and what I can do to help build a process around it, moving into, second line leader role.
Totally. I think as a first-time leader, the thing that I maybe mistaked as like building culture was taking people out to go bowling and taking people out for drinks or lunches, as opposed to like individual decisions that I might have made throughout the day of like, I can't remember the quote exactly, but somebody once said, creating culture is more about what you allow, what you don't address than the things you do. And so help me, I'd love to kind of drill in on like what does it mean to like create culture versus like create the space, so to speak? Like how do you help me understand that kind of piece there?
Yeah, you can't just force it on anyone. I mean, everybody is completely different. And so for you to, it's almost like you're creating a culture on a one-to-one basis before you create it for the team, because you need to understand everything about your team member, why they are motivated in the way that they are, how they like to be recognized. And that's actually how you're building it, because you're creating the dynamic one-to-one to truly know about this one individual, because you don't lead as a team. You don't just like lead everybody exactly the same, just as you wouldn't manage your clients exactly the same, because everybody is different. So flexing and really truly understanding the needs per individual on your team builds up. And then when you're with the team, everyone to be comfortable to share and learn and get to know each other. And then that's how it gets more and more, because you're kind of in it together. Everyone is wanting to help each other out. Like I said earlier, everyone has their own individual quota, but when we have big wins together, it's like the whole team won. So that's where the 6 pillars came in for me of trying to figure out, well, how do I help give examples on the best way to do this for my leaders?
I love that. And I want to get to the 6 pillars in a minute. The thing maybe that I think has changed quite a bit, and maybe changed a bunch and now it's changed a little bit less, is when you say the word together, together might mean on a Zoom, together might mean in an office, together might mean, one for 2 days, one for 3 days. How has remote or hybrid work kind of changed how you create culture?
Yeah, a lot. And I feel like I'm still learning quite a bit, even though we're 3 years in. I can always tell because my daughter was born May of 2020, so I can always like backtrack into when we got into this. I mean, that's a whole other story of dealing with all of the craziness. But for when I think about the beginning of the pandemic, we were doing check-ins like twice a day, like trying to do all these like virtual happy hours, virtual whatever it was, and it worked for a time, and then it just didn't work. And I think going back to what and that personal connection, and I would say having one-to-one conversations that aren't via Zoom has been helpful. I do a lot of walk and talks. We're just, hey, let's go on a walk together and let's talk just on our phone. Like, you don't need to always be on camera, because I feel like sometimes that's the opposite as we're on camera. I feel like sometimes that does the opposite because you feel very forced into that. Whereas like when you were in the office, you didn't have a camera on you the whole time during every meeting. You were sitting around the table and you weren't getting 100% attention. So that's one thing. And of course, whatever you can do on site, if possible, if it works. I mean, I know my teams we're all over. We do have a good amount in our Chicago headquarters, and we go into the office every once in a while. But I'll just say it again, goes back to the human connection, and whatever you can do to draw, to learn more and draw people in to say like, hey, I get it. If you work best where you need to go do a workout class in the middle of the day, please do it. Like, this is your time. I want you to feel very free of like what the asks are. I need you on this time at this moment, but otherwise I want you to have the autonomy to go and do your own thing, because remote work is no longer like 9 to 5. It bleeds, and it does. I don't want it to bleed, but sometimes it does, where, you sign on early because you did get that email and the contract. You're like, oh, now I'm at my desk, I'm working. So I welcome any tons of other ideas, because this has been a topic of conversation. I mean, really for the last 3 years on how do we continue that, because it is really challenging.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up an interesting point, where when you can work all the time, right? Like, if it's not 9 to 5, then what is it? And you said something really interesting in the pre-interview that I'd love to share. Talk to me about how you balance figuring out what you will and will not flex on from a calendar perspective.
Yeah. I think it goes back with like you being a leader and being vulnerable and sharing first, and sharing, your motivations. And for me, I have 2 young kids, and I want to be able to take my daughter to school in the morning, and that is blocked off on my calendar. And, my team knows and they also know if for some reason I have to go pick her up or whatever, I do need to move a meeting. And I say the same to them. I understand that not everybody has the same situation, but if there is something that is your own, like non-negotiable, let's talk about it, and let's hear. And I want it to be available and open for us to discuss, because you can't, like, I don't want people working all of the time, and I want them to be able to have their balance, whatever the balance looks like. I'm not going to put ratios on it, but it's important to just have that open conversation.
I love that. I think it kind of leads naturally into the 6 pillars. And so why don't we talk a little bit about kind of what the 6 pillars are, and then let's get into the first one.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, I was just trying to make what I was doing a little bit more digestible. And I was thinking about, well, how do you foster the team culture? Because you can't just have it happen overnight. And that's where I came up with these 6 items that I was already doing. And I will say I have borrowed a lot of these ideas from people that I work with, peers. That's what we do. Of course, there's some creative of my own, but I do want to give shout outs to my previous managers who have helped me with this. But with like anything, sales process, we have to have a process. We have to have something that is easily digestible. And that's where I came up with the 6 pillars.
Cool. And so talk to me about, what are these 6 pillars of things that you were doing? Maybe can you list them off, and then let's jump into the first one.
Yeah. So it's knowing their why, having a voice, breaking down barriers, equity, celebrating wins and establishing traditions.
Love that. And equity, not options, but
Not options, not
it's diversity, equity, inclusion kind of equity.
yes. Making sure that, equality is different than equity, making sure that you're giving all of the resources needed to get to the same result as everyone on the team, really.
Love it. So why don't we start with the knowing their why? I want to ask why this is important, but that seems a bit redundant. Can you help me understand, why you start here?
Yeah. Sales is tough. It's funny. It's like I have never thought of anything else, and I've never imagined anything else, but I know plenty of people through the course of, just being in sales that got in it and hated it and got out as soon as they possibly could. And so that's why it's important to know the motivator behind everything. I mean, Simon Sinek is always someone I would highly recommend. I mean, the TED Talk famous or his book, or just understanding as humans, we all have reasoning behind things, and we don't just go to work. No one does. I mean, maybe some people do, but definitely not the majority of people. We go to work for reasons, and we have reasons behind it. So understanding all of your individuals on your team, their why and their reasons is incredibly important, because it is their driver, and it's helping them when they're in their valleys to talk like, hey, I know you wanted to pay off your student loan. I know you wanted to do this or do this, like that. It's really important to know and tie to that, because it is tough, right? I just am like going through my head as an IC of like, having to get no sometimes, and having hard conversations and having hard contract negotiations and all of those things. It's like, well, why are we doing it? We're doing it for a bigger thing. We're not doing it just so you can get money, which all salespeople are definitely motivated by money, I'm sure. But what's the bigger meaning? And so I have and share with my teams to share with their teams to start the year and have everybody go around and share their why and why they do this every day and what makes them motivated.
Interesting. So you do this in a group setting.
Mm-hmm.
Start with your why, and you every year, because people kind of tend to update I guess their whys tend to change.
Yeah. And the leader starting first, so that again, you're creating that space for the vulnerability and like leading from the front, and like I'll tell you, so that you know what I'm doing this for.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Where else does that like the conversation around figuring out their why show up? Like, is it just once a year you talk about this, or does it come up in one-on-ones or quarterly reviews? Or
We do. So at G2, you're talking about culture. I mean, we do have an amazing culture in general. We have our peak values, and we do peak development plans. And so that's like a quarterly conversation with your leader about what you want to do professionally. And sometimes this will go into some of the personal goals that might be on like your why. And I try to pair this with the old school vision board. I mean, I tell you, I still love vision boards. I used to print them out and put them like in a picture frame so you could have them on your desk. But I love them. I am a true believer of like writing down goals to achieve. And so we pair that, and like halfway through the year, we'll pull up the vision board in the team meeting and just say like, hey, this is how I was able to do this, or I'm still working on this changed. So there's a little bit of that accountability piece in it too.
Oh, I love that. And I'm going to go have a look at the G2 peak values, but I'll save that link for later, and I'll throw it in my in the show notes here. And so when we look at understanding their why, it helps us kind of, I guess it helps you make meaning of, hey, you're trying to hit your quota, but it's not just about hitting your quota. It's about, hey, you're trying to get to this greater goal that is personal to you. Is that a fair way to summarize that?
No.
Interesting. Can you tell me about a time when maybe you didn't know somebody's why, and like it, was it harder? Was it easier? Like how did you figure it out? If you were coming in, say, you're picking up somebody in flight, and you maybe haven't had that annual meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I think I could go back to like my first role as a leader, not really knowing this part. It's just like making an assumption that it was everyone just wants to get commission. And that was kind of a bad assumption to make, because it's not always about that. And quickly adjusting and understanding, maybe if the morale was a little low, I can think of it like the example was like, you could just tell that the head was not in the game. And so what I did just was took the personal approach and just like, hey, what's going on? How are things going? And really they wanted to transition into a different type of role. And so like the motivator was totally different of like, they wanted to be at the company, but they just felt like they were more interested in a non-quota carrying role. And that was all I needed to do, is ask that question. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have gotten it. And then again, that was many years ago, before we had established career progression conversations and all of that. But I would just say, for any leader coming in and taking a new team, like, this is an important start, no matter where you're at in the year, to do with your whole team, just so you can understand everybody and how they tick. I mean, and that even goes into like the having a voice, which is the next piece of this, is when you have your first one-on-ones, just understand like, well, do you like morning one-on-ones or afternoon? Are you somebody that likes to get recognition in a group setting or not? It's the little things that like help build and help them feel like, okay, this is somewhere that I truly will have a voice, because what I know and what I like is getting considered into like what we're trying to build.
And so having a voice is not necessarily having an opinion or having the space to weigh in on a decision. It's more about having your boss understand your preferences and then kind of tweak the way the team runs to account for all of the different preference stacks on the team.
Yeah. And also that's to do with feedback too, of like having really strong feedback loops. I always, the way I think about it is, if it's a decision that's like a company decision, probably not much things that we can change. But if it's something that is just to the team, like, hey, can we make this team meeting on Thursday rather than on Tuesday? Like, I'll take it. It's our team and it's not my team. And so ensuring that everyone feels comfortable to share that feedback. So I do like quarterly anonymous feedback forms every quarter to say like, hey, here's our meetings. Do we like to structure anything we want to change? Any ideas? Just so it's always, again, it's our team, not just my team.
I have so many follow-up questions. First off, anonymous versus non-anonymous. Why anonymous?
Because I feel like if they were to tell me, if I were to ask in a group setting, first, I don't like doing that because maybe some people don't feel comfortable sharing feedback in a group setting. I just want them to feel like they, as my window is open out there, my door just slammed. I want them to feel like they can share whatever is on their mind and not feel like there could be some type of anything back to them of like, why did you give that feedback? So that's the main reason, truly. I just want it to feel like as inclusive as possible for anyone to be able to share what's on their mind when it was in regards to our team. In general, we do a lot of feedback at G2, which is amazing. So you can give feedback and receive feedback at any, not just like at performance reviews. We do it even after projects or whatever it is. But it is, for me, I like the team specific feedback to be able to be that open forum.
Love that. And so it's interesting because I've done it, I think, both ways. And I think it depends on, my preference depends on who I'm soliciting feedback from. But I'm curious, this is specific to like sales leaders and to your team, what sorts of things are you soliciting feedback from kind of on a regular basis?
The anonymous is everything to do with anything that's scheduled for our team. So whatever, if we're doing call listenings, if we're doing forecast calls, team meetings, one-on-ones, team outings, those are what and I always try to add in the survey, like all the things we're doing to help jog the memory. And then I always leave like an open forum of like anything direct feedback you want to share with me, anything I can do, start, stop, continue. What are things that you're seeing and you want us to try? That's the piece of it. But when it comes to like feedback on, what we're doing in a day-to-day, that is something we're doing on a one-to-one. Let's listen to a call, give feedback. or type of thing. So that's not anonymous. This is things to do with our team structure and what we're doing on a weekly basis is what I do.
Gotcha. Kind of removes the political element of it. If you know, Fred wants to move the meeting from Thursday to Friday or something like that, then people are a little bit more comfortable voting whatever they want.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I know the next pillar is breaking down barriers. I'm imagining the Kool-Aid man running through a wall, but I suspect it's deeper than that.
Fun fact, I'm from Nebraska, and I think Kool-Aid originated in Nebraska, just so if you didn't know that, Colin.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, it's true. The sugary drink that is so delicious. I don't think
surprised
when I was a kid. Yeah, it does. It goes into having a voice quite a bit, because it kind of breaking down barriers to me is thinking about not only the feedback and receiving it, but the external factors that come in, and having that vulnerability of being human in moments, and understanding when might be a good time to we don't need the one-on-one. We don't need to, it goes back to my story of when I was in my valley. I don't want to sweep topics under the rug if we really need to talk about it, if you feel comfortable. And so one of the things I do, and I have to give a plug to Melanie Marinelli. She's a sales leader at Sprout Social. She did this when I was an IC. And to this day, some of the reps that I've worked with that are now leaders and my peers, they do this with their teams. But at the end of the year, or even when it's whatever your stressful time is in your fiscal, I reach out to family and friends behind the scenes of my reps, and I ask them for words of encouragement and any pictures or funny stories. And then I actually read them. I surprise them in a team meeting and I read them all. And so it's like me reading a letter from your wife to your peers, and it's giving, no matter what, we're learning about you, but we're learning about why you do this, and the people that see the other side of it, see you coming home, having a stress day, hearing about everything. And then we just get to know each other so well. I know the parents of some of the reps that I have on my team, because they were on my team for many years, and I would ask them for this every year, and it was just a fun little thing. But in the end, it did break down a lot of barriers, because we totally know why you're doing this. We started the conversation with that, but now we understand the people behind it and getting to know them. I just don't feel, this is just my leadership style. I'm not one to just be okay, I'm only talking work and that's it, and then we're going home and it is what it is. It doesn't work for me personally. It might work for others. It just hasn't been, I haven't seen that be successful if you're talking about really having a collaborative culture.
So you're going to these people's parents, their spouses, and you're asking for words of encouragement, or help me with this. What does that look like?
Yeah, I send an email, and it's end of year push, and we're just saying, hey, Colin's been doing an amazing job this year. I know it's about to be a really stressful month. Would love to, if you have any words of encouragement. I'm going to share this in a group setting. And I've been doing it almost 12 years that I've been in this role.
Wow.
Mainly as a frontline leader. But yeah.
Amazing. I've never heard of anybody doing that. That's really interesting.
All back to Melanie. Got to give her credit. She did that.
Shout out to Melanie.
Yeah.
So this helps, I guess, personalize the other individuals on the team, because you know that, Colin's dad's a little bit of a weird one. He said some pretty hilarious things in the update.
Well, it's funny because I do ask for some funny stories, but I preface this will be just so you know, I will share this. But yeah, it's always fun.
So if I wanted to send out that email to my team, what else are you asking for? Words of encouragement, funny stories. What else?
Pictures, anything that, I had one mom, when actually she's now a leader on my team, but her mom sent 60 photos. It was amazing. So I picked up a few, but now I still have them, which is just so great. Really, really good. Even childhood photos, just an opportunity. I kind of leave it a little open just to see what can be shared. So
what's the craziest example of a photo you've received, or wildest, or the one? Are there any that really stand out?
That's a good question. I feel like the kids ones in general are just hilarious because if you just like flash back to that time and then they tell a story about it. There have been really good stories about being in sales when they're like 8, of like trying to sell something in the neighborhood. And I love that because it's like, wow, you are just innately in this and you really wanted to sell those, like, what was it, like book it or something in the neighborhood to try to get some cash on the side, like your lemonade stand going. But those are good. I'll say the stories in general are one of the favorite pieces that I have. And then I think back to my teams and like we remember them together. It's just a fun, it goes to establishing traditions, which is the last part of the pillar of like, it's something that you know what to expect, but also it's like, wow, this is part of our team and this is what we do. And we do really want to learn about each other.
I could see it adding so much more kind of color commentary or context behind the individual and kind of where they came from. If you could see them as a kid on the rollerblades with a paper route.
Yeah. Or I'll say the same said later. I think there was like a face painting picture. It was like a horse or something that I have a very vivid memory of. But it's great.
We'll get links to all these pictures.
Yeah.
From the show notes. All these personal moments that were shared with you from somebody's parents. No, probably don't want to do that.
Probably not.
I do want to talk about, so thank you for sharing the breaking down barriers, because I think reading it, I had a different understanding, but I can see now how these are things that would kind of help connect people, because you learn a little bit more when you hear from the words of their parents or you see a picture of them out of the office. I'd love to kind of segue into equity and like, what does that mean in this context to you as the next pillar being equity?
Yeah. So this is going to be very specific to the manager and the leader of like really truly understanding. I mean, this is like a culmination of the other pillars. None of this can happen if you haven't created an inclusive space where your people on your team can truly be themselves. And I think it goes to the beginning of like the hiring process and ensuring that you're not hiring for culture fit, which is, I definitely used that word in the past. And what unconsciously what it does is like puts you in a box of like what I think I need to know instead of making sure you're hiring for culture contribution. So it's who do I need on my team to really help contribute to the culture we have. And it really goes to understanding from your talent acquisition team what your company's DEI efforts are, where you can have more help. And like I mentioned, equity being different than equality, it's really important to like ensure that you're giving the resources needed to each individual on the team to achieve the same result, instead of just giving everybody the same, which is equality, but everyone has different circumstances. The other piece of it, and it's still in the hiring part, but knowing unconscious bias. And I mean, there are a lot out there. And so making sure you're educating yourself on what some of the pitfalls you might fall into when you're doing any interviewing and you're looking for new teammates. And just, I think that the one thing on leaders and something that I'm doing, trying to educate myself every day, is this is a topic that is a continuing education topic, and making sure that if we don't know an answer to a question, let's use our resources. And if your company doesn't have resources, there's external resources. G2 has a lot of amazing resources. It's just important that we aren't putting ourselves in a team situation that is not diverse, that's not going to get us where we need to go, that we need contributions from all different people to come into our teams to really help us be successful and learn from each other. We're getting personal. We're learning about families. We're learning about all of this. And that goes to making sure that like our team truly feels like they can be very comfortable in an inclusive environment.
It's interesting. I remember, as you were saying this, I was thinking back to the first team I hired, and I have a memory of, and it's not the first few people, but I would say it was the first time we were hiring kind of at scale, right? Because the first people I pulled into PR were kind of like there, like one of our first account managers was Michelle, and she was in the co-working space, and I knew her. She was awesome. I liked her. She was way more senior for the role. And then the company that she was at went through some, call it shenanigans. And then she was suddenly available. And I was like, hey, I need help. Will you come help me? It was pulling in people close. And then there was a few others that joined the team that were like that. But when I first started hiring and going out and posting ads and interviewing people, what I noticed was that the first number of people, 5, 6 people that we ended up hiring, I remember looking around the room and be like, these are all a bunch of guys that look like me and act like me and have the same interests as me. I don't think this is good. So like, what do I do? And it's been a bit of a journey because I remember the culture, and the first time we hired, the first female we hired on the team, it was a bit of a cult, it was a bit of a dude culture to come into.
Yeah.
So we created a bit of a flywheel, a bit of momentum. And like, fortunately, we had this realization and we were able to hire some strong people, and like it ended up kind of balancing itself out. But I do remember this very first moment. So like, how do you avoid getting there? How do you make sure you keep striking that balance?
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, you can't, you ultimately are hiring for best in the role, and you need to give everybody an opportunity to be in that position. I know one, like a very easy unconscious bias that I feel like is common is, what is it? No, I'm blanking on it. Confirmation bias. That's what it is. So instead of confirmation bias of like thinking you know the answer, and in order for us not to do that, what we try to do is, okay, I'm going to ask all the same questions no matter what. Because if I go in and I think I know what they're going to say, I'm like, I'm not going to ask them that. Well, that's instantly putting them in a different light than a candidate that's applying to the exact same job. So making sure you first understand all of the biases that come in, and partner with the resources that you have. Again, like if you don't have internal resources, go externally. There's a lot of really good networks out there that will help with like partnering with companies to ensure that we are doing our best, not only to educate, but to bring in diverse talent.
I think even the simplest thing that you just shared, that was the first thing, might have been non-obvious, was you asked the same questions for the same interviews. That was one of the solutions that we had moved to, was from a multi-step interview where it's like, okay, I'm going to sit down and just ask whatever comes to mind, to we follow the who process. We do a screen, we do a who, we do 3 focus. These are the 3 types of focus that we do. Everybody gets the same. It might be different people, so there is some variability, but that in and of itself. Oh, and then having a scorecard at the end of every interview. He said, these are the things that are important. Rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 or whatever it was. Like, I think that sounds like something that you're doing that was honestly a huge game changer for us, and is basically free. Cost of the book is $20, but you can get all the resources online for free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and newer leaders aren't, it's hard to know all of this right away. And so making sure that whatever you can do to have mentors in the space, have obviously internally, if you don't have things built out, if you're, a 0 to 10 startup, maybe even more than that, use your peers and networks to understand, to make sure that you're not putting yourselves in a situation where you are hiring everyone like yourself.
If you end up on a team with a bunch of Collins, it's probably not going to be good. One isn't enough. Yeah, one is more than enough. Let's talk about some celebrating victories, celebrating wins. Why is this a pillar, and what do you mean by celebrating wins?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this might be the most, when you talked about like team outings, is something you think about the culture. Celebrating wins is maybe one of the more obvious ones. It's funny. It goes back to like getting to know the team. I have run into situations, in me as being a frontline leader, is I have people that are sales professionals that don't want to be publicly recognized, which I thought, I do, everyone else should, type of thing. So it's being consistent in what they have asked for. So it's like, if I have asked in my first one-on-one with a rep, hey, how do you like to be recognized? And they say, I don't want to be recognized in a big group setting. Can you just send it one-to-one? Be consistent in that, and remember that, and share it with your boss if your boss wants to recognize that person, so that you are considering where they're at, because not everybody is the same. Of course, we don't want that to be. And then in general, be consistent. Decide as your peer leader team, how you're going to recognize your team in general. And so if it's in like this Slack channel or whatever you all use, make sure you're consistent in the reasons why you're going to shout folks out. And then really making sure you're setting those big, hairy, audacious goals. I mean, it can't always be a team event. I will say, like, some of my OG teams, for some reason, always wanted to go on a boat. So we like set some big goals, and we found the T boat in Chicago. Great experience, I will say. But when we hit it, it was just like such an incredible like feat, and we did it. And whenever you set some of those big goals, share it with your boss, share it with their boss, and so that they can help like cheer everyone on as you go. And of course, get approval on what you want the end goal to be. But it's just one of those things that I know it's kind of back to the basics here, but doing it, being consistent. There's no win too small. Little things, shouting them out with your bosses. Those are things that you want to make sure that you're doing, because those are going to go in the warm fuzzy folders for everybody when they are not feeling like they're having a great day.
I love it. I want to get to the last one because I've got a couple questions I want to leave some space for, and I appreciate you got a customer call coming up, and being a salesperson, these are the most important calls that we can take. No offense to this podcast, none taken.
Yeah, no, this is important. Yeah.
I would drop everything for a sales call. It's in my DNA. I'm like, unless it's like a kid related thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, it's fine.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Exactly.
I've like taken customer calls at like a hockey game where I'm getting ready to play hockey, and like I saw that email come through, and I'm like walking around in my full gear talking to a customer trying to close a deal, and people are like, dude, we're warming up. I'm like, it'll be fine.
Are you a pacer when you talk? Like there was always when we were in the office, there was always like the people weren't at their desk, and people that had to stand. It's just funny.
Sometimes I was pacing and I was walking around in my skates, and I don't know if you noticed, but I'll shift back and forth here because I do kind of get that. Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit harder on Zoom calls because you don't want to be like, pick your laptop up and walk.
That's true. I mean, that's maybe where the walking desk is coming to. Everyone loves.
Yeah, there you go. I want one of those VR desks I can run in any direction,
Yeah.
Totally. I don't actually want that. It sounds terrible, but it'd be an interesting thing to try for a week. Let's talk about establishing traditions. How does this? So what is this? How does this kind of bring the team together?
Yeah. It's funny. I did not coin this term, I will say. But the way I think of it is, we have traditions of like this family. Like, you go to this person's house for this holiday. They cook this thing. It's just what you know. Well, why wouldn't we have it at work when we are with these people for half of our lives as well? So it's not only building it together. So I mentioned, like, we take feedback as a team, we work as a team, we think about like what we want to do things, but it's so they know what they get like day one. Having, when you're interviewing, having one of your reps talk to the candidate and just like ask any question. What's it like to be on the team? And they'll talk about the traditions, the things that we do, the things that bring the team together. And it's our team, not, my team as a leader. And so that's really what it's down to. It's just like maybe starting out if you're taking on a new team, like, what is your team mission statement? Have it. That's what you live by. That's what you know that everyone is passionate about. It's just ensuring that everyone knows what they're going to get in a sense on day one, because the world of sales is very unpredictable. And so if we could have some predictability and like some comfortability, that's important.
So could you, I wonder if you could share a couple of examples of traditions that either on, your team now or some highlights from previous teams.
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, every example I've given today are good examples of traditions. Doing the annual call, like emails to the team family members, to do the vision boards, to do the why statements, to do, a quarterly event or whatever that might be. It's really kind of up to you and your team's needs, but it does go into all of the things I talked about today would be good examples.
Love it. What's one of your like less important, maybe it's a less important tradition, but it means something to you, or it's really enjoyable to you?
I think when I think about it, just like as a putting myself in the frontline leader shoes, for me, it's the recognition, and however they would like to receive the recognition. That is, I loved that piece of it, and being that, always knowing that if it was going to happen, they were going to get some positivity coming from me. I'm definitely a half glass full individual, and like almost maybe annoyingly so, that some of my past reps might say, but that's what I love. And I can't say it enough, but I love the calling or getting the stories from the families. That has to be like top highlight, because it's just fun to recall them. I can think about like a million stories right now. That's a heavier lift than the simple lift of how you decide to recognize your team and how they want to be recognized.
Totally. I love that. I had some different questions I wanted to ask to wrap this up, but I think instead I want to call an audible here, and because as I was listening to these kind of 6 pillars, I'm sitting there, I'm going, how does Michelle have the time to do this? You not only have 2 teams, you got 2 markets. How do you have I'm picturing you at the kind of control center with all these buttons and levers. Like, how do you keep track of to do all of this stuff? Like, I could hardly talk about it all on the podcast and keep it all in my head. How do you do this with however, infinity reps that you have to manage, and like to keep track of these 6 different things across all these, people? That sounds, do you have a big spreadsheet? Like, how do you stay on top of this? Good habits.
Good question. No spreadsheets. I will say I have an amazing leadership team that works with me, and they are doing these with their teams. And so it's really, they're all creating their own. They're creating their own traditions, or creating their own day-to-day feedback loops. However, they're doing it, and it's bubbling into the culture that is the teams that surround me. So it's really, I'm just trying to empower my leaders to be able to do this and run with it and make it their own, just like I made it my own. That's really what it comes down to. So I'll give all the credit to my leaders that do it day to day.
And I totally appreciate that they're the ones that are kind of on the front lines dealing with the ICs. How about just for you and the individuals I think the question I'm trying to drive towards is like, help me understand. I have 8, 9 direct reports right now, and I'm trying to think about how do I implement this with them? And I'm doing some of these things, but not all of them. What advice do you have to me to sit down and say, okay, I've got these 6 pillars. Come Tuesday, what can I do to implement some of these?
Yeah, I think at a different level, it might be, we would probably change the pillars a little bit when it comes to leaders. Like for me, what's most important is the why, understanding what, as a team, what's feedback, what we're doing, how I'm every quarter doing my own feedback loops to ensure that, we're doing everything that the team wants, and then really trying to break down the barriers and the vulnerability. So it might not be we're doing vision boards every time, but thinking about high level, where do my leaders want to be? What do I need to do to help them? And continuing with the performance, we call it a peak development plan, which is like, where do you want to be in 3 years? What do you want in 5 years? I'm having those conversations on a quarterly basis with my team too.
Gotcha. And how much time a week do you spend on like specifically 6 pillar stuff? Like, do you have time booked off in your calendar? Does it come up when it comes up?
It comes up when it comes up. It's more of like the foundation is there. And so, yes, this is like bucketed into pillars, but it is very fluid. If it's a one-on-one conversation that, we might need to go take a walk and talk for, it just happens. Like, you don't plan it. I think it's just important, just having the foundation of knowledge of these are the things that I could be trying to do to help with my team creating their own culture, that it's like I have in my toolkit that I can use when I need to. Some of them are time bound, like the vision boards and some of the other things, but the rest is like, I know I have them and I'm going to try to use them when I need to, type of thing.
That. I was hoping you're like, oh, I've got a calendar and it's like these 700 things are all pre-programmed. You can copy and paste it into your life and it'll solve all your problems. But unfortunately, it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No. It is all organic, I guess I would say.
That's fair. And it makes sense when you start with people's why and then you kind of build up from there. I think that's going to be very instructive in terms of like how they like to be managed and how they like to have a voice and be received praise. And I think there's some really great advice in there. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that's a good start. Like you don't have to come to your team tomorrow with all of these, like, we're going to do all of this. That's like very forced. You know, your team, especially if you're coming and taking on a new team, start with feedback right away. Like get an anonymous survey going so you can kind of scope where you're at and understand where the low-hanging fruit would be that like we could do one of these things that are in here. So it's definitely not one of like, don't do it all tomorrow type of thing.
I love it. Michelle, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. If people are looking to get in touch, what's the best way for them to reach you?
You can LinkedIn. Definitely shoot me a message. I'll pay attention. I'd love to hear stories on like if you've tried these. The other thing I also am always searching for is team event ideas, virtual and in person, because it goes back to like what we talked about. It's so hard to be remote. So I'm always picking people's brains about what they're doing in the other companies to see how we can continue to just try some new creative things.
Cool. Have you done GeoGuessr before?
No, what's that?
Team? Basically we've done two things that were really fun. We did GeoGuessr where you kind of split the team into two Zoom rooms. Was it two Zoom rooms? Basically we split everybody into teams and then we give everybody like, we split them into like multiple Zoom rooms. GeoGuessr is like you see a picture and you can kind of click around like it's Google Maps Street View, but it's, the signs are like blurred out. And then you've got to guess, and you got to see which team gets it first. And so you got 4 people who are like, click here, click there. Oh, what does that look like? Oh, I see this. So that's one we've done a couple times. That was really fun.
That's good.
And then there's the Wikipedia game. Have you played Wikipedia before?
No, man, I'm walking away with 2 things free.
Okay, so go to Wikipedia, and then I think if basically there's it's like recent posts. Basically, you just I think there's like a random button you can click on Wikipedia that takes you to somewhere to just like a random article. Yeah, and so you click on a random article, and then everybody's got to start on a different random article, and then they can only click on links in Wikipedia, and they have to get there. There's no going back. And so then it's the first person to get to, like, I just clicked random and it took me to the Silvassa Nassori corridor, right? And so now I have to get there this seems like a really hard one because there's only like a paragraph of text on it.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah. That's cool. I love it. So we're always down for like a murder mystery. We do a lot of trivia. That's really fun. But always open to like the experiences, the virtual experiences. There's a lot of fun ones out there. So
cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for sharing. And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Colin. Thanks for having me.